The wind cut through Florence Wright's thin coat like 1,000 frozen knives as she watched her husband's wagon disappear into the white distance. His choice to save himself and abandon her in the blizzard of 1882, burning worse than the icy air filling her lungs. She stood on the desolate mountain pass between Nevada and California, her legs already numb from the knee-deep snow, understanding with terrible clarity that Marcus had never loved her the way she had foolishly loved him during their brief, tumultuous marriage. The realization should have broken her, but instead, a strange calm settled over her trembling body as she turned away from the direction he had gone, refusing to give him the satisfaction of dying while staring after him like some pathetic abandoned dog. Florence had been married to Marcus Wright for 8 months, though it felt like 8 years of walking on eggshells and swallowing her words. He had courted her in Sacramento with pretty promises and a silver tongue, sweeping the 22-year-old seamstress off her feet with talk of building a ranch together in Nevada, of creating a life filled with love and prosperity. Her mother had warned her that Marcus had cold eyes, but Florence had been too enchanted by the idea of escape from her mundane existence to listen. Now, as the snow continued to fall and the temperature dropped with the setting sun, she understood that her mother's intuition had been devastatingly accurate. The argument that led to her abandonment had started over something trivial, a comment about the route Marcus insisted on taking despite warnings from other travelers about an early winter storm brewing in the mountains. Florence had suggested they wait a day or two in the last town, but Marcus had accused her of questioning his judgment, of trying to control him like she supposedly did with everything else. The accusations had escalated as they climbed higher into the pass, his voice growing louder and meaner with each mile until he finally stopped the wagon, grabbed her arm with bruising force, and shoved her out into the snow. She had stood there in shock as he gathered her small carpet bag and threw it at her feet, his face twisted with a hatred that seemed to come from somewhere deep and ancient within him. He told her she could freeze for all he cared, that he had made a mistake marrying a nagging woman who thought she knew better than her husband, that he would tell everyone back in Nevada that she had run off with another man. Then he had climbed back onto the wagon and urged the horses forward without a single backward glance, leaving her stranded on a mountain pass with night approaching and a blizzard intensifying around her. Florence knew she should feel terror, should be screaming and crying and begging the empty air for mercy, but instead she felt a strange sense of clarity. If she was going to die, she would die trying to survive, not weeping over a man who had never deserved her in the first place. She picked up her carpet bag, grateful that it contained at least a change of clothes and the small amount of money she had managed to hide from Marcus over the months of their marriage. Looking around, she tried to orient herself and remember what the landscape had looked like before the snow had begun to obscure everything. There had been a cluster of rocks about half a mile back, she recalled, formations that might provide some shelter from the wind. Moving through the deep snow was exhausting, each step requiring enormous effort as her skirts became soaked and heavy, but she pushed forward with grim determination. Her fingers were losing feeling inside her thin gloves, and her face felt like it was being flayed by the wind, but she kept moving because stopping meant dying, and she refused to give Marcus that final victory over her spirit. The rocks were farther than she remembered, or perhaps the snow had disoriented her sense of distance, but eventually she spotted the dark shapes rising from the white landscape. She stumbled toward them, her legs barely responding to her commands, her breathing labored and painful in the frigid air. When she finally reached the largest formation, she discovered a small overhang that provided minimal shelter from the driving snow. She crawled beneath it, curling into a ball with her carpet bag clutched against her chest, and allowed herself to close her eyes for just a moment. The cold was seeping into her bones now, making her thoughts slow and sluggish. She knew this was dangerous, knew that falling asleep in these conditions meant never waking up, but her body was demanding rest after the physical and emotional trauma of the day. She forced her eyes open and tried to think of anything that might help her survive until morning. There was no wood for a fire, no way to generate warmth except through her own body heat, which was rapidly depleting. She pulled everything from her carpet bag and wrapped the extra clothes around her limbs, creating makeshift insulation that was inadequate but better than nothing. As darkness fell completely and the temperature continued to plummet, Florence began to drift in and out of consciousness. She thought about her mother, who would never know what really happened to her daughter. She thought about the dreams she had harbored as a girl, dreams of true love and partnership that seemed foolish now in the face of harsh reality. She thought about all the things she would never do, places she would never see, children she would never hold. The unfairness of it all sparked a weak flame of anger in her chest, but even that was fading as the cold claimed more and more of her awareness. She did not hear the horse approaching through the storm, did not register the sound of boots crunching in the snow nearby. When strong hands touched her shoulder, she assumed she was hallucinating, her dying brain conjuring up rescue where none existed. But then she was being lifted, wrapped in something warm and heavy, and a deep voice was speaking words she could not quite comprehend through the fog in her mind. Vincent Zimmerman had been riding hard to reach the next town before the storm became completely impassable, when his horse had suddenly balked, refusing to continue forward despite his urging. He had learned long ago to trust his mount's instincts, so he had dismounted to investigate, and that was when he spotted the dark shape beneath the rock overhang. At first, he thought it might be an injured animal, but as he approached, he realized with horror that it was a woman and she was barely alive. The 26-year-old cowboy did not waste time wondering how she came to be alone in a blizzard on a remote mountain pass. He simply gathered her frozen form into his arms, alarmed by how light she felt and how little warmth remained in her body. He wrapped her in his own thick coat and the blanket from his bedroll, then secured her on his horse in front of his saddle, holding her against his chest as he urged his mount forward through the deepening snow. Vincent had been traveling from his family's ranch in Northern California to Carson City on business, a trip he had made dozens of times over the years. He knew these mountains well, knew there was a lined shack about 2 miles ahead that miners used during the summer months. It was his only hope of getting the woman out of the storm and warming her up before hypothermia claimed her completely. His horse struggled through the drifts, and Vincent found himself talking to the unconscious woman, telling her to hold on, that she was safe now, that he was not going to let her die. The lined shack appeared out of the swirling snow like a miracle, its rough wooden walls and slanted roof the most beautiful sight Vincent had seen in months. He dismounted carefully, keeping the woman secure in his arms, and kicked the door open with his boot. Inside, the air was only marginally warmer than outside, but at least they were out of the wind. He laid the woman on the single wooden bunk and quickly set about building a fire in the small stove, grateful to find a supply of wood stacked in the corner and matches in a tin on a shelf. Once the fire was crackling and beginning to warm the small space, Vincent turned his attention to the woman. Her lips were blue, her skin gray and waxy, and when he pressed his fingers to her neck, her pulse was barely perceptible. He knew he needed to warm her core temperature gradually, that warming her too quickly could send her body into shock. He removed her wet outer garments with clinical efficiency, trying not to think about the impropriety of undressing an unconscious stranger, focusing only on the medical necessity of his actions. He wrapped her in every dry blanket and piece of clothing he could find in the shack, including his own spare shirt, then pulled the bunk closer to the stove. He melted snow in a pot to create water, knowing she would need hydration when she woke up, if she woke up. Vincent refused to entertain the possibility that he had found her too late. There was something about her face, even gray and nearly lifeless, that struck him deeply. She looked young, vulnerable, and utterly alone in a way that resonated with parts of his own soul he usually kept locked away. As the hours passed and the storm raged outside, Vincent maintained his vigil. He kept the fire burning, periodically checked her pulse and breathing, and waited for some sign that she would survive. Around midnight, she began to shiver violently, which Vincent knew was actually a good sign, her body attempting to generate heat now that her core temperature was rising. He moved closer, adding his own body heat to the blankets, holding her shaking form and murmuring reassurances he was not sure she could hear. It was nearly dawn when Florence's eyes finally fluttered open. For a long moment, she stared at the unfamiliar wooden ceiling above her, confused and disoriented. Her body ached everywhere, and her fingers and toes burned with a fierce, tingling sensation that brought tears to her eyes. She turned her head slowly and found herself looking into the concerned face of a man she had never seen before. Vincent had dark hair that needed cutting, a strong jaw shadowed with several days of beard growth, and eyes the color of weathered bronze that held an intensity and kindness that took her breath away. He was sitting beside the bunk, still wearing his vest but missing his coat and shirt, which she realized with dawning embarrassment she was currently wrapped in along with numerous blankets. "Easy now," he said softly when she tried to sit up. "You have been through hell and back. Take it slow." "Where am I?" Her voice came out as a cracked whisper, her throat raw and painful. "Line shack about 10 miles from the Nevada border. I found you under some rocks last night during the storm. Can you tell me your name?" "Florence," she managed. "Florence Wright. I am Vincent Zimmerman." "Can you tell me what happened, Florence? How did you end up alone in a blizzard?" The memories came flooding back, bringing with them a wave of humiliation and anger and grief. Tears began to stream down her face, surprising her with their intensity. She had not cried when Marcus abandoned her, had not allowed herself that weakness, but now, safe and warm and in the presence of genuine concern, her defenses crumbled. Vincent listened without interruption as she told him everything, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, his jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. "Your husband left you to die," he finally said, his voice low and dangerous. "That is not just cruelty, that is attempted murder." "He was my husband in name only," Florence said bitterly. "I see that now. I was a fool to marry him." "You were not a fool. He was a liar and a charlatan who preyed on your trust. That is on him, not you." Vincent stood and moved to the stove, pouring some of the heated water into a tin cup. "You need to drink. Small sips. Your body needs to rehydrate." Florence accepted the cup with trembling hands, noticing for the first time that her fingers were wrapped in strips of cloth. "What happened to my hands?" "Frostbite, but not severe. I have been warming them gradually." "You will probably lose some skin. Maybe the tips of a couple of fingers get sensitive to cold from now on, but you will keep everything. Your feet are the same. You were very lucky." "Lucky," she repeated with a hollow laugh. "I was abandoned to freeze to death and nearly succeeded." That does not feel particularly lucky. You survived. That makes you lucky in my book." Vincent returned to his seat beside the bunk. "The storm should clear by this afternoon. Once it does, I will take you to the nearest town. There is a small settlement called Pine Grove about 15 miles south of here. They have a doctor who can check you over properly, and we can figure out what to do from there." "What to do?" Florence echoed, the reality of her situation beginning to sink in. She had no home, no husband despite still technically being married, almost no money and nowhere to go. The future stretched before her like a vast, empty plain with no landmarks to guide her way. "One thing at a time," Vincent said gently, as if reading her thoughts. "First, you recover. Then we make a plan. You are not alone, Florence. I will not abandon you like he did. That is a promise." Something in the absolute certainty of his words made Florence's throat tighten with emotion. This stranger owed her nothing, had already saved her life at considerable risk to his own. Yet he was making promises about her future, as if it mattered to him personally. She studied his face, searching for signs of the manipulation she had grown so accustomed to with Marcus, but found only genuine concern and a steady strength that made her want to believe in goodness again. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you make such a promise to someone you just met?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "My mother died when I was 10 years old. She got sick, and my father did not have the money for a proper doctor. A traveling preacher and his wife stopped by our ranch, and the wife sat with my mother for 3 days, nursing her, praying with her, giving her comfort in her final hours. My father never forgot that kindness from a stranger. He raised me and my brothers to understand that we help people when they need help, no questions asked, no debts incurred. That is just what decent human beings do." "Not all human beings are decent," Florence said quietly. "No, they are not. But that is all the more reason for those of us who try to be decent to stick together." He smiled slightly, the expression transforming his serious face into something warm and approachable. "Besides, my mother would come back and haunt me if I rescued a woman from a blizzard only to dump her in the nearest town with no support. She had strong opinions about proper behavior." Despite everything, Florence found herself smiling back. "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was. She would have liked you, I think. She always said she could tell a person's character by their eyes, and you have honest eyes, Florence Wright." The use of Marcus's surname made Florence flinch. "I do not want that name anymore. He does not deserve to have me carry it forward." "What was your name before?" "Wright. Wright was my maiden name. Wright was Marcus's surname too. We were distantly related actually, though we did not know it until after we married. It should have been a sign." She paused, thinking. "My middle name is Me from my grandmother. I think I would like to go back to being Florence Me, just that. No surname tying me to anyone." "Florence Me," Vincent repeated, trying it out. "It suits you, strong and straightforward." Over the next several hours, as the storm gradually subsided outside and the shack warmed to something approaching comfortable, Vincent and Florence talked. He told her about his family's ranch near Redding, California, about his father and 2 younger brothers who ran cattle and bred horses. He spoke of the land with such affection that Florence could picture the rolling hills, and the way the sunset painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple. He explained that he had been on his way to Carson City to negotiate a contract for selling horses to the army when the storm had caught him. Florence told him about her childhood in Sacramento, about learning to sew from her mother and working as a seamstress before meeting Marcus. She found herself sharing memories she had not thought about in years, stories about her father who had died when she was 15, about her dreams of someday opening her own dress shop. Talking to Vincent was easy in a way conversation had never been with Marcus. Vincent actually listened, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. By early afternoon, the wind had died down and weak sunlight was filtering through the cracks in the shack's walls. Vincent checked on his horse, which he had managed to stable in a lean-to attached to the building, and declared that the animal was ready to travel if Florence felt strong enough to ride. "I feel like I was trampled by a herd of cattle," Florence admitted, "but I can ride. The sooner we get to Pine Grove, the sooner I can figure out what comes next." Vincent helped her dress in her now dry clothes, politely turning his back while she changed. Her dress was wrinkled and stained, and she had lost one of her gloves somewhere in the snow, but at least she was presentable. When she stood, her legs were shaky and Vincent immediately moved to support her. "Maybe we should wait another day," he said with concern. "You are still weak." "I am weak, but I am also determined," Florence replied. "I spent months letting fear of Marcus's anger keep me passive and silent. I am done being that person. If I can ride, then I ride." Something like admiration flickered in Vincent's eyes. "All right then. But you ride with me, and if at any point you feel faint or sick, you tell me immediately. Understood?" "Understood." The journey to Pine Grove took most of the day, the snow making travel slow and treacherous. Florence rode in front of Vincent, his arms secure around her as he controlled the horse, and she tried not to think about how right it felt to be held by him, how safe she felt in his embrace. She had known this man for less than 24 hours, yet she felt more connected to him than she had ever felt to her husband of 8 months. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Pine Grove turned out to be a collection of about 30 buildings clustered around a main street, the kind of rough mining town that dotted the California and Nevada landscape. Vincent took Florence directly to the doctor, a grizzled old man named Dr. Patterson, who examined her with efficient thoroughness and confirmed Vincent's assessment of her condition. "You are a lucky young woman," Dr. Patterson said, echoing Vincent's earlier words. "Another hour or two in that storm and we would be having a very different conversation. As it is, you will make a full recovery. Keep those fingers and toes warm, change the bandages daily, and try to get some good food and rest. You have been through a significant trauma, both physical and otherwise." Vincent paid the doctor before Florence could protest, then took her to the town's only boarding house. Mrs. Chen, the elderly proprietor, took one look at Florence's exhausted face and immediately prepared a room with a hot bath and a meal. When Florence tried to explain that she had very little money, Mrs. Chen waved her hand dismissively. "Mr. Zimmerman has taken care of everything for the next week. You rest, eat, recover. We can worry about the future when you are strong again." Alone in the simple but clean room, soaking in a hot bath that made her abused body sing with relief, Florence allowed herself to cry again. But these tears were different from the ones she had shed in the lined shack. These were tears of release, of grief for the innocence she had lost and the hard lessons she had learned, but also of gratitude for the unexpected kindness that had saved her life. That evening, Vincent came to check on her, knocking softly on her door. Florence had dressed in her only other outfit, a simple gray dress that was much less formal than the one she had been wearing during her abandonment. She had brushed out her long brown hair and pinned it up loosely, and some color had returned to her cheeks. "You look much better," Vincent said with obvious relief. "How are you feeling?" "Sore, tired, but alive, thanks to you." Florence gestured for him to enter, then hesitated, aware of propriety. "Perhaps we should talk downstairs in the common room." "Probably wise," Vincent agreed with a slight smile. People talk in small towns. They settled in the boarding house's small parlor, where a fire crackled cheerfully in the hearth. Mrs. Chen brought them coffee and some of her famous ginger cookies, then discreetly withdrew. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of unaddressed questions hanging between them. "I sent a telegram to my father," Vincent finally said. "Told him what happened and that I would be delayed returning home. I also sent a telegram to the sheriff in Carson City, reporting what your husband did. I do not know if they will do anything about it, but at least there is an official record." "Thank you," Florence said softly. "I had not even thought that far ahead." "That is understandable. You have been focused on surviving." Vincent leaned forward, his expression serious. "Florence, I have been thinking about your situation. You need time to recover and figure out your next steps. You mentioned you were a seamstress. Pine Grove is too small to support that kind of business long term, but Reading is growing fast. There is definitely a need for skilled seamstresses there." "Reading," Florence repeated, "where your family's ranch is located. About 10 miles outside of town, yes. I am not suggesting anything improper," Vincent added quickly. "But my father's ranch is large and we employ several people. We have a housekeeper, Mrs. Donnelly, who lives in a cottage on the property with her daughter. I am sure they would welcome your company, and it would give you a safe place to stay while you establish yourself in Reading. Mrs. Donnelly has been talking about wanting help with mending and sewing for the ranch hands. It would be honest work with honest pay." Florence studied his face, searching again for ulterior motives and finding none. "Why are you doing this, Vincent? You have already done so much." "Because you need help and I am in a position to offer it. Because what happened to you was wrong and you deserve a chance to rebuild your life. Because—" He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "Because from the moment I found you, something in me decided you were mine to protect. I know how that sounds. I know we just met, but I cannot explain it any better than that." Florence's heart was racing. She should be frightened by such possessive language, should be running from a man who spoke of claiming her after one day. But Vincent's words did not feel threatening or controlling like Marcus's had. They felt like a promise, like a vow, like the beginning of something she had given up hoping to find. "I am still married," she said quietly. "Legally, I belong to Marcus. Legally, perhaps. But he abandoned you, left you to die. That has to be grounds for annulment or divorce. We can find a lawyer in Reading, get the process started. It will take time, but you will be free of him." "And then what?" Vincent reached across the space between their chairs and gently took her bandaged hand in his. "And then you decide what you want your life to look like. No pressure, no expectations, just possibilities." Florence looked down at their joined hands, at the way his touch made her feel both grounded and capable of flight. She thought about the woman she had been yesterday, abandoned and freezing, convinced she was going to die alone and unmourned. She thought about the woman she wanted to become, strong and independent and unafraid. And she thought about the man sitting across from her, who had appeared out of a blizzard like an answer to a prayer she had not known she was praying. "I think I would like to see Reading," she said finally. "I think I would like to meet Mrs. Donnelly and learn about this ranch of yours. But Vincent, I need you to understand something. I am not ready for romance or courtship or anything like that. I need time to heal, to find myself again, to learn who I am when I am not defined by a man's expectations." "I understand," Vincent said simply, "and I respect that. I am offering friendship and support, nothing more. The rest, if there is a rest, can wait until you are ready, if you are ever ready." "Thank you," Florence whispered, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "Thank you for seeing me as a person, not just a woman who needs to be managed or controlled or saved. You saved yourself, Florence. You got yourself to shelter. You survived the night. I just provided transportation and fire. The strength that kept you alive, that was all you." They stayed in Pine Grove for 3 more days, until Dr. Patterson declared Florence fit to travel. During that time, Vincent showed Florence around the small town, introduced her to the local shopkeepers and residents, and treated her with such careful respect that Florence found herself relaxing in his presence in ways she had never been able to relax around Marcus. On their last evening in Pine Grove, they took a walk along the creek that ran through town, the water partially frozen and glittering in the moonlight. Florence had borrowed a warmer coat from Mrs. Chen, and the evening air was crisp, but not unbearably cold. "I am nervous," Florence admitted as they walked, "about meeting your family, about starting over in a new place. What if I fail? What if I cannot make it on my own?" "Then you try again," Vincent said. "Failure is not falling down, Florence. It is refusing to get back up. And you have already proven you are not a person who stays down. You have a lot of faith in someone you barely know." "I know enough. I know you are brave and resilient and honest. I know you have a good heart and a strong spirit. That is enough to build on." They stopped on a small bridge that crossed the creek, leaning against the railing and looking up at the stars that filled the winter sky. Florence felt something shift inside her, a subtle realignment of her understanding of what was possible. She had thought her life was over when Marcus drove away, but maybe it was actually just beginning. "Vincent," she said softly, "I want you to know that even though I said I am not ready for romance, I am not blind. I see you. I see your kindness and your strength and the way you look at me like I matter. And someday, when I am whole again, when I have found myself again, I would like to explore what this connection between us might become." Vincent turned to face her, his eyes searching hers in the moonlight. "Someday is enough for me, Florence. I am a patient man, and some things are worth waiting for." He did not kiss her, did not make any physical advance beyond taking her hand again and giving it a gentle squeeze. But the promise in that moment felt more profound and binding than any vow Florence had spoken at her wedding to Marcus. The journey to Reading took 5 days, as Vincent took his time and made sure Florence was never overtaxed. They traveled through some of the most beautiful country Florence had ever seen, through forests of towering pines and across meadows that would be filled with wildflowers come spring. Vincent pointed out landmarks, told her stories about the region's history, and shared more about his family and their ranch. The Zimmerman Ranch, Vincent explained, had been established by his grandfather in 1858, when California was still young and wild. His father, Wilhelm Zimmerman, had expanded the operation significantly, and now they ran several hundred head of cattle and had built a reputation for breeding quality horses. Vincent and his brothers, Victor and Vaughn, each had their own areas of responsibility, with Vincent handling the business side and horse training, Victor managing the cattle operation, and Vaughn overseeing the day-to-day ranch work. "They are going to interrogate you," Vincent warned with a grin as they neared Reading. "Both my brothers and my father. Fair warning." "Interrogate me about what?" Florence asked nervously. "About everything. They are going to want to know who you are, what your intentions are, whether you are trustworthy. My father takes the well-being of everyone on the ranch very seriously. He will want to make sure you are safe and comfortable, but he will also want to make sure you are not running some kind of confidence scheme." "A confidence scheme," Florence repeated incredulously. "Do I look like a confidence artist?" "No, but my father has seen enough of the world to know that appearances can be deceiving. Do not take it personally. He will come around once he gets to know you." They arrived at the ranch in late afternoon, when the winter sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The ranch sprawled across a valley, with the main house sitting on a slight rise overlooking corrals, barns, and various outbuildings. It was larger and more prosperous than Florence had imagined, speaking to years of hard work and careful management. Several men were working in the corrals as they rode up, and they all stopped to watch Vincent and Florence's arrival with open curiosity. Vincent dismounted first, then helped Florence down, his hand steady on her waist. "Welcome to the Zimmerman Ranch," he said with obvious pride. "Welcome home." The word home struck Florence with unexpected force. She had not had a place that felt like home since her mother's small house in Sacramento, and that felt like a lifetime ago. Could this place truly become a home for her? It seemed too much to hope for. The front door of the main house opened, and a tall man with graying hair and Vincent's same strong features stepped out onto the porch. Wilhelm Zimmerman surveyed Florence with sharp eyes that missed nothing, his expression unreadable. "Father," Vincent said, his hand lightly touching the small of Florence's back in a gesture of support. "This is Florence me. Florence, my father, Wilhelm Zimmerman." "Mr. Zimmerman," Florence said, forcing herself to meet his gaze directly, "thank you for allowing me to come here. Vincent has told me so much about your ranch." "Has he?" Wilhelm's voice was deep and measured. "And what exactly is your relationship with my son, Miss Me, father?" Vincent said with a note of warning. "It is a fair question," Florence interjected. "Mr. Zimmerman, your son saved my life after my husband abandoned me in a blizzard. He has shown me nothing but kindness and respect. I am here because Vincent suggested your housekeeper might have worked for a seamstress, and because I need a safe place to figure out my next steps. That is the extent of our relationship. I have no designs on your son or your family. I am simply a woman trying to rebuild her life after making some terrible choices." Wilhelm's stern expression softened slightly. "You speak plainly. I appreciate that. Come inside. You look half frozen and Mrs. Donnelly has supper almost ready. We can discuss the details of your employment over a hot meal." The interior of the ranch house was warm and welcoming, with sturdy furniture and personal touches that spoke of a family who actually lived in and loved their home. Mrs. Donnelly turned out to be a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s with an Irish accent and a motherly demeanor that immediately put Florence at ease. Her daughter, Rose, was a shy girl of about 17 who helped with the cooking and cleaning. Over dinner, with Vincent's brothers joining them and peppering Florence with questions that ranged from curious to protective, Florence told her story again. She held nothing back, explaining exactly what had happened with Marcus and how Vincent had found her. By the time she finished, even the skeptical Victor looked sympathetic, and young Vaughn was declaring that Marcus should be horsewhipped. "The important thing is that Florence is safe now," Wilhelm said firmly. "Mrs. Donnelly, you have been saying you need help with the mending and the making of clothes for the hands. Are you willing to take Miss Me on and teach her the specific needs of the ranch?" "Of course," Mrs. Donnelly said warmly. "And I would be happy to have her stay with Rose and me in the cottage. It will be nice to have another woman to talk to. Rose is lovely, but she is at that age where she is more interested in the Cowboys than in conversation with her old mother." "Mother," Rose protested, blushing furiously, which made everyone laugh. "Then it is settled," Wilhelm said. "Florence, you will work with Mrs. Donnelly. We will pay you a fair wage, provide room and board, and you will be under the protection of this ranch and this family. Anyone who wants to harm you will have to go through all of us first. Is that acceptable?" Florence felt tears threatening again, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness of these strangers who were offering her not just employment but belonging. "More than acceptable. Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman, all of you. I promise I will work hard and earn my place here." "I have no doubt of that," Wilhelm said, and Florence saw where Vincent got his directness and his quiet strength. After dinner, Vincent walked Florence to the cottage where she would be staying, carrying her small carpet bag. The cottage was cozy and well-maintained, with 2 bedrooms, a small sitting area, and a kitchen. Mrs. Donnelly showed Florence to a room that was simply furnished but clean and comfortable, with a real bed and a window that looked out over the valley. "I will leave you to settle in, Mrs. Donnelly said. "Rose and I usually rise at dawn to start breakfast for the ranch hands, but you can sleep as late as you need tomorrow. You are still recovering." After Mrs. Donnelly and Rose had retired to their own rooms, Vincent and Florence stood outside the cottage, neither quite ready to say good night. "Your family is wonderful," Florence said. "I was so nervous, but they made me feel welcome." "They can see what I see," Vincent replied. "Someone worth welcoming." "Florence, I leave for Carson City tomorrow to finish the business I started before the storm. I will be gone about a week. Will you be all right here without me?" "I will be fine," Florence assured him, surprised by how much the thought of him leaving disturbed her. "I have survived worse than a week without you. That you have." Vincent reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture intimate and tender. "When I get back, we will go into Reading and find you a lawyer, start the process of ending your marriage legally. And then we take it one day at a time. No rushing, no pressure, just 2 people getting to know each other and seeing where it leads." "That sounds perfect." Vincent hesitated as if he wanted to say something more, but then simply nodded. "Good night, Florence. Sleep well." "Good night, Vincent. Safe travels." She watched him walk back to the main house, his tall figure silhouetted against the light spilling from the windows, and felt something warm and hopeful unfurling in her chest. For the first time since Marcus had thrown her out of that wagon, Florence felt like she might actually have a future worth looking forward to. The days of Vincent's absence passed quickly, filled with work and new routines. Mrs. Donnelly was an excellent teacher, showing Florence the specific needs of ranch life: how to mend work clothes to withstand harsh treatment, how to sew sturdy seams that would not split during physical labor. Florence also began making shirts and pants for some of the ranch hands, using fabric that Mrs. Donnelly had ordered from a supplier in San Francisco. The work was satisfying in ways Florence's previous sewing had not been. In Sacramento, she had made fancy dresses for wealthy women who often complained about her work and tried to negotiate lower prices. Here, the ranch hands were grateful for well-made, comfortable clothes, and they paid promptly and thanked her sincerely. It was honest work for honest people, and Florence thrived in the environment. She also began to explore the ranch, taking walks in the afternoons when her eyes needed a rest from close sewing work. The land was beautiful even in winter, with rolling hills and distant mountains and wide open skies that made Florence feel like she could breathe fully for the first time in years. She met more of the ranch hands, learned about their work with the cattle and horses, and slowly began to feel like part of the community rather than an outsider being tolerated out of charity. Wilhelm Zimmerman remained somewhat reserved around her, but Florence sensed it was his nature rather than any specific distrust of her. He was scrupulously fair, checking with Mrs. Donnelly about Florence's work and making sure she had everything she needed. Victor and Vaughn were friendlier, often stopping by the cottage in the evenings to chat and tease Rose about her various crushes. Vincent returned on the 7th day, riding in at sunset looking tired but pleased. Florence was sitting on the cottage porch, mending a torn shirt, when she spotted him. Her heart leaped in her chest, and she had to force herself not to jump up and run to greet him like some lovesick girl. But when he saw her and his whole face lit up with that smile, She knew he had been just as eager to return as she had been to see him. He came to the cottage after washing up and changing, bringing news from Carson City and beyond. The sheriff had agreed to investigate Marcus's actions, though Vincent warned that getting justice would be difficult given the circumstances. More importantly, Vincent had located a lawyer who specialized in difficult divorce cases and had made an appointment for Florence to meet with him the following week. "He thinks you have a strong case for annulment based on abandonment and endangerment," Vincent explained as they sat on the porch in the gathering darkness. "It will not be quick, and it will not be cheap, but he believes he can free you from that marriage." "I have some money saved," Florence began, but Vincent shook his head. "I am covering the lawyer's fees. Before you protest, consider it a loan if you must. You can pay me back over time once you are established, but I will not have you trapped in a dead marriage because you cannot afford a lawyer." Florence wanted to argue, wanted to maintain her independence, but the practical part of her knew that Vincent was right. She could not afford a good lawyer on her seamstress wages, not anytime soon. "A loan, then, with interest. I insist on that." "Fine. 1% interest compounded annually." "Vincent, that is barely anything." "Take it or leave it, Florence, that is my offer." She laughed despite herself. "You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Zimmerman, so I have been told." He was quiet for a moment, then asked, "How have you been? Really, not just the polite answer, but the truth." Florence considered the question seriously. "Better than I expected. Your family has been wonderful, the work is fulfilling, and I actually feel safe here. I wake up in the morning without dread, which is something I had forgotten was possible. But at night, sometimes I have nightmares. I dream that I am back in the snow, freezing, and no one comes. Or I dream that Marcus finds me and drags me back. Those dreams leave me shaken." "That is understandable. You went through a trauma. It is going to take time for your mind to process it fully. But Florence, I want you to know that Marcus will never touch you again. If he is foolish enough to show up here, he will have to face me and my entire family. You are protected here, truly protected." "I believe you," Florence said softly. And she realized she did believe him. In a way she had never believed Marcus's promises. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Florence worked with Mrs. Donnelly during the day, sewing and mending and slowly building a small nest egg of savings. In the evenings, Vincent would often visit, and they would talk for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about his travels, about the interesting people he had met and the beautiful places he had seen. She told him about her dreams for the future, about wanting to eventually open her own shop in Reading, about designing clothes that were both practical and beautiful. They did not speak of romantic feelings, did not make declarations or promises beyond friendship. But the connection between them deepened with each conversation, each shared laugh, each moment of comfortable silence. Florence found herself thinking about Vincent constantly, noticing the way he moved, the sound of his voice, the rare but devastating effect of his smile. She was falling for him, she knew, but the knowledge did not frighten her the way she thought it would. The trip to meet with the lawyer happened on a cold February day. Vincent drove Florence into Reading in the ranch wagon, pointing out various buildings and landmarks along the way. Reading was larger than Florence had expected, a bustling town with a main street lined with shops, saloons, a bank, a church, and various businesses serving the surrounding ranches and farms. The lawyer, Mr. Holbrook, was a thin man with kind eyes and a methodical way of speaking that inspired confidence. He listened to Florence's story, took detailed notes, and asked careful questions about dates, locations, and witnesses. When Florence mentioned the line shack where Vincent had taken her, Mr. Holbrook's eyes lit up. "That is excellent. The shack provides evidence of the storm and your location. Mr. Zimmerman, would you be willing to testify about finding Mrs. Wright and her condition? Absolutely, Vincent said without hesitation. And Dr. Patterson in Pine Grove examined you and can testify to your injuries. Yes, Florence confirmed. Then I believe we have a strong case. I will file for an annulment on the grounds of abandonment, cruelty, and endangerment. California law is still evolving on these matters, but judges have been increasingly sympathetic to women in situations like yours. I estimate it will take 4 to 6 months to resolve, possibly longer if Mr. Wright contests it. He won't, Florence said with certainty. Marcus wanted to be rid of me. He will probably be relieved. Nevertheless, we will proceed assuming he might contest. Better to be overprepared than underprepared. Mr. Holbrook began drafting documents, explaining each step of the process and what Florence could expect. By the time they left the lawyer's office, Florence felt both hopeful and exhausted. The process of legally ending her marriage had begun, and while it would take months, she was finally on a path to freedom. Vincent treated her to lunch at a small restaurant near the main square, and they ate in comfortable silence, watching the townspeople go about their business. Redding was a town on the rise, Vincent explained, with new businesses opening regularly and families moving in to take advantage of the growing opportunities. It would be a good place for Florence to eventually establish her dress shop, once she was ready. As they prepared to return to the ranch, a well-dressed woman approached their table. She was perhaps 50, with elegant clothing and a confident bearing that spoke of education and social standing. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Florence. "I could not help but notice your dress." "Did you make it yourself?" Florence looked down at the gray dress she had modified with some trim and decorative stitching during her evenings in the cottage. "Yes, madam, I did. It is lovely work. The stitching is exquisite. I am Harriet Caldwell. My husband owns the bank here in Redding. I have been looking for a skilled seamstress who can create more fashionable clothing than what is currently available in our local shops. Might you be interested in taking on private commissions?" Florence's heart raced. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she needed to establish herself. "I would be very interested, Mrs. Caldwell. I am currently working at the Zimmerman Ranch, but I could certainly take on additional work in my free time." "The Zimmerman Ranch? Why, Wilhelm Zimmerman is a friend of my husband's. Excellent people." Mrs. Caldwell pulled a card from her reticule. "Please come to my home at your convenience. I would like to discuss having several new dresses made, and if your work is as good as this sample suggests, I will recommend you to my friends. A good seamstress in Redding could do quite well for herself." After Mrs. Caldwell departed, Florence stared at the card in her hand with a sense of wonder. "Did that really just happen?" "It did," Vincent confirmed, grinning broadly. "I told you that you had a future here, Florence. The universe is starting to agree with me." The commission from Mrs. Caldwell turned out to be the first of many. Florence visited the Caldwell home the following week and spent several hours discussing designs, taking measurements, and reviewing fabric samples. Mrs. Caldwell wanted 3 new dresses for the spring season, and she was willing to pay generously for quality work. True to her word, she also began recommending Florence to her friends, and soon Florence had a waiting list of wealthy Redding women eager for her services. Florence continued her work for the ranch during the day, but her evenings were now spent working on commissions for her growing list of private clients. The money she earned was significant, far more than she had made in Sacramento, and she carefully saved every penny, dreaming of the day when she could open her own shop. As winter gave way to spring, the ranch came alive with new activity. Calves were born, requiring round-the-clock attention from the hands, Horses were trained for sale or for use on the ranch. The days grew longer and warmer, and Florence found herself spending more time outdoors, often walking with Vincent through the greening pastures in the evenings after her sewing was done. Their relationship continued to deepen, though they still had not crossed the line from friendship into romance. Vincent never pushed, never demanded more than Florence was ready to give. But the tension between them was growing, an awareness of what they both wanted but were carefully holding back. One evening in late April, as they walked along the creek that ran through the ranch property, Vincent suddenly stopped and turned to face Florence. "I need to say something, and I need you to just listen without responding right away. Can you do that?" Florence's heart was pounding, but she nodded. "I am in love with you, Florence. I think I have been since the moment I found you in that storm, and every day since has only made me more certain. I love your strength, your resilience, your kindness. I love how you laugh at my terrible jokes and how you stand up to my father when you disagree with him. I love watching you sew, the way you get completely focused on your work. I love your dreams and your determination to build a life on your own terms." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I know you need time. I know you are still healing from what Marcus did to you. I am not asking you to say anything back to me right now. I am just asking that you know how I feel, and that when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I will be here, waiting for you, wanting to build a life with you. There is no rush, no pressure, just the truth." Florence stared at him, her eyes filling with tears. She had known he cared for her, had suspected his feelings ran deep, but hearing him say the words with such raw honesty broke something open inside her chest. "Vincent," she whispered, "I do not need time. I have known for weeks now. I love you too. I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes because I never thought I could trust my own judgment again after Marcus. But you have shown me what real love looks like, patient, kind, respectful. You have given me space to heal and the freedom to become myself again. How could I not love you?" Vincent let out a breath that sounded almost like a sob of relief. "You love me." "I love you," Florence confirmed, and then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her close, his face buried in her hair. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Please," Florence breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and searching, asking rather than demanding. Florence melted into the kiss, her hands gripping his shoulders, her whole body alive with sensation and emotion. It was nothing like kissing Marcus had been, mechanical and obligatory. This was connection, passion, promise, and possibility all wrapped into one perfect moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you, Florence. I know it is too soon to ask properly. I know you need to be free of Marcus first, but I want you to know that is where my heart is. I want to spend my life with you, build a future with you, have children with you if you want them. I want to wake up every morning and know you are mine and I am yours. Then ask me properly when the time is right," Florence said, smiling through her tears. "And I will say yes. I already know I will say yes." They kissed again, slower this time, exploring and savoring. When they finally walked back to the cottage, hand in hand, the stars were out and the night was filled with the sounds of spring. Florence felt like she was floating, drunk on happiness and hope, and the sure knowledge that she had found something precious and rare. The next few months passed in a blur of work and growing love. Florence's reputation as a seamstress continued to spread, and she was soon making enough money from her private commissions to save a significant amount toward opening her own shop. The legal process of ending her marriage moved forward, with Marcus surprisingly cooperative once the papers were served. He signed everything Mr. Holbrook sent him, apparently eager to be free of the marriage and its scandal. Vincent courted Florence properly, despite her protests that they were already well beyond the courtship stage. He brought her flowers picked from the ranch's meadows, took her on picnics to beautiful spots on the property, and one memorable evening, hired a fiddler to play while they danced under the stars in front of the main house. Wilhelm and the rest of the family watched with obvious approval and delight, happy to see Vincent so thoroughly in love. In July, 6 months after Mr. Holbrook had filed the initial papers, the annulment was granted. Florence's marriage to Marcus Wright was legally dissolved, as if it had never existed. Florence cried when Mr. Holbrook delivered the news, tears of relief and joy, and the profound satisfaction of finally being free. That evening, Vincent proposed. He took Florence to their spot by the creek, where he had first confessed his love, and dropped to one knee with a ring that had belonged to his mother, a simple gold band with a small sapphire that caught the evening light. "Florence, you are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. You came into my life in a moment of crisis, and you have transformed everything. You have made me believe in fate, in second chances, in the power of love to heal and restore. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you, supporting you, and being your partner in all things?" "Yes," Florence said through her tears. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." The ring fit perfectly, and Vincent stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. They kissed until the sun set, and the evening star appeared, and Florence marveled at how much had changed in less than a year. She had gone from freezing in a blizzard, abandoned and alone, to being cherished and celebrated, engaged to a man who saw her as an equal and a partner. They married in September, in a ceremony held at the ranch with nearly everyone in Reading in attendance. Florence wore a dress she had designed and sewn herself, a creation of ivory silk with delicate embroidery that had taken her weeks to complete. Wilhelm walked her down the makeshift aisle to where Vincent waited, looking handsome and nervous in a new suit. The ceremony was performed by the town's minister, and Florence's vows were strong and clear, promising to love Vincent in joy and sorrow, in strength and struggle, for all the days of her life. The reception lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and food that seemed to never run out. Mrs. Donnelly cried through the entire event, declaring Florence was like a daughter to her. Victor and Vaughn gave speeches that were equal parts sentimental and embarrassing. Wilhelm, in a rare show of public emotion, toasted Florence as the daughter he never had and the perfect match for his eldest son. Vincent and Florence spent their wedding night in the main house, in Vincent's room that would now be their room. They made love with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies and rhythms, creating new memories to replace the painful ones Florence carried from her first marriage. Vincent was patient and attentive, making sure Florence felt safe and cherished, and Florence discovered that physical intimacy could be beautiful when built on a foundation of genuine love and respect. In the months that followed, they settled into married life. Florence continued her sewing work, and with Vincent's help and a loan from Wilhelm, she opened her own dress shop in Reading the following spring. The shop was located on Main Street, with a large front window for displaying her creations and a workroom in the back where she could sew and meet with clients. She hired Rose Donnelly as her assistant, giving the girl training in the trade and a chance to earn her own money. The shop was immediately successful, with women coming from as far as Sacramento to commission Florence's designs. She became known for creating clothes that were both fashionable and practical, understanding that women in the West needed clothing that could withstand real work while still making them feel beautiful. Her reputation grew beyond Reading, and soon she was turning away clients because she simply could not keep up with demand. Vincent continued his work with the ranch, traveling regularly to sell horses and negotiate contracts. But he always came home to Florence, and their reunions were filled with joy and passion. They built a small house on ranch property, halfway between the main house and the cottage, a place that was entirely their own. Florence decorated it with care, creating a home that reflected both their personalities and their shared dreams. In late 1883, Florence discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror, as memories of her mother's difficult pregnancies surfaced. But Vincent was steadfast in his support, hiring the best doctor in Reading and making sure Florence had everything she needed. Wilhelm, thrilled at the prospect of a grandchild, was equally solicitous, constantly checking on Florence's well-being and driving everyone slightly crazy with his concern. Their son was born in May of 1884, a healthy baby boy they named James Wilhelm Zimmerman. Florence had never known love like what she felt holding her son for the first time, looking down at his tiny, perfect face and realizing she had helped create this miracle. Vincent cried when he held James, his hands shaking as he cradled the infant against his chest, and Florence fell in love with her husband all over again, seeing him with their child. Life settled into a new rhythm with a baby in the house. Florence reduced her hours at the shop, focusing on her most important commissions and training Rose to handle more of the daily business. Vincent spent more time at the ranch, wanting to be close to his wife and son. They were exhausted and covered in spit-up most days, but they were also happier than Florence had ever imagined being. James was followed by a daughter, Elizabeth, 2 years later, and then another son, Thomas, 2 years after that. The house was filled with noise and laughter and the organized chaos of a young family. Florence sometimes thought back to that day in the blizzard, to how certain she had been that her life was over, and marveled at the unexpected path that had led her here. The dress shop continued to thrive, even as Florence's focus shifted more toward her family. Rose eventually took over the day-to-day operations, with Florence designing pieces and handling the most prestigious commissions. The shop's success meant Florence was financially independent, contributing equally to the family's income, which was important to her sense of self and her partnership with Vincent. Marcus Wright, her former husband, died in 1887 in a barroom fight in Virginia City, Nevada. The news reached Florence through Mr. Holbrook, and she felt nothing beyond a mild relief that Marcus could never threaten her again. She had not thought about him in years, too busy living her life to spare energy for the past. She shared the news with Vincent, and they agreed not to speak of it again. Marcus had no place in their story anymore. The years passed in the way years do when life is full and good. The children grew from babies to toddlers to children with their own personalities and dreams. James was thoughtful and serious like his grandfather Wilhelm. Elizabeth was adventurous and bold, and Thomas was gentle and artistic, already showing talent for drawing and painting at a young age. The ranch prospered under the combined efforts of Vincent and his brothers, expanding their operations and their reputation. Wilhelm aged gracefully, taking increasing pleasure in his grandchildren and the legacy he had built. Mrs. Donnelly retired from housekeeping, and Rose married one of the ranch hands, a steady young man named Peter who treated her with the respect and affection she deserved. Florence watched her children grow with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness of time's passage. She made sure Elizabeth learned that women could be strong and independent, that marriage should be a partnership of equals. She taught all her children the value of kindness and courage, using her own story as a lesson about resilience and the importance of never giving up, even when circumstances seem hopeless. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Florence back to the spot by the creek where he had first told her he loved her. They stood hand in hand, older now, marked by the years but still deeply in love, and renewed their vows to each other. Vincent promised to love Florence for another 10 years and another 10 after that, for as many years as life granted them. Florence promised the same, her heart full of gratitude for the second chance she had been given. "You ever regret it?" Vincent asked as they walked back toward their house where the children were staying with Wilhelm for the night. "The path your life took, the hardships you endured," Florence considered the question seriously. "I regret Marcus's cruelty and the pain he caused. But I cannot regret the journey that led me to you. If I had not been left in that blizzard, if you had not found me, we would never have met. Our children would not exist. This life we have built would not be real. So no, I do not regret it. I survived the worst moment of my life, and it led me to the best thing that ever happened to me." "You are the best thing that ever happened to me," Vincent said softly, pulling her close. "The day I found you was the day my real life began." They kissed in the gathering twilight, still as passionate and connected as they had been in those early days of their courtship. The love between them had deepened over the years, weathering the challenges that all marriages face and emerging stronger for it. As they reached their house, Florence paused to look back at the ranch spread out below them, the lights beginning to glow in the windows as evening fell. This was her home, truly and completely. These were her people, her family, her legacy. She had been given up for dead in the icy wind, but she had survived. More than survived, she had thrived, building a life of meaning and love from the ashes of her worst moment. The years continued to unfold. James grew into a young man with a talent for horse training like his father, eventually taking over that part of the ranch operation. Elizabeth, true to her adventurous spirit, married a surveyor and traveled throughout California and Oregon, writing letters home filled with descriptions of the places she saw and the people she met. Thomas surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a school in Reading where he taught children to read and write and see the beauty in the world through art. Wilhelm passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1895, surrounded by his family. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched over the decades. Florence spoke at the service about how Wilhelm had given her a chance when she had nothing, how his fairness and integrity had set the standard for the kind of person she wanted to be. She missed her father-in-law deeply, but took comfort in knowing that his legacy lived on in his children and grandchildren. The Zimmerman Ranch continued under the joint management of Vincent and his brothers, adapting to the changing times while maintaining the core values Wilhelm had instilled. Florence's dress shop evolved too, with Rose eventually passing it on to her own daughter, keeping the business in the family and maintaining the reputation for quality that Florence had established. As the new century approached, Florence and Vincent found themselves becoming grandparents. James and his wife had twin boys who were constantly getting into mischief. Elizabeth and her husband had a daughter they named Florence in honor of her grandmother. Thomas and his wife had 3 children who all showed artistic talent. The house that had once been filled with their own children's laughter was now filled with grandchildren's voices, and Florence cherished every chaotic, joyful moment. On a warm spring evening in 1900, Florence and Vincent sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they had done thousands of times over the years. They were in their 60s now, their hair gray, their hands marked by age and work, but their love as strong as ever. "Do you remember what you said to me that day in the line shack?" Florence asked. "When I was barely conscious and you were trying to keep me alive," Vincent thought back. "I probably said a lot of things. I was terrified you were going to die. You told me to hold on, that I was safe, that you were not going to let me die. You called me yours before you even knew my name." Vincent smiled. "I did. It felt right, even then. Like I had been waiting my whole life to find you, and now that I had, I was not going to let you go." "I was so broken when you found me," Florence said softly. "Not just physically, but spiritually. I had given up on goodness, on love, on the possibility of happiness. And then you appeared out of a blizzard like some kind of miracle and reminded me that the world still held beautiful things." "You were never broken, Florence. You were battered and hurt, but your core, who you really are, that was always whole. You just needed time and space to heal. I am honored that you let me be part of that healing." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, supervised by James and Elizabeth, who were visiting for the weekend. The sound of children's laughter mixed with the evening sounds of the ranch, creating a symphony that spoke of life and love and continuity. "I would go through it all again," Florence said finally. "Every moment of pain and fear and struggle, just to end up here with you. This life we have built, this family, this love, it is worth every hardship that came before." Vincent took her hand, their fingers interlacing in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "You are my greatest adventure, Florence Zimmerman. My greatest love, my best friend, my partner in all things. I found you in the icy wind, and you became the warmth that made my life complete." Florence leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the solid strength of his presence beside her. She thought about the young woman she had been, abandoned and freezing on a mountain pass, certain she was going to die. She thought about the journey that had brought her from that moment to this one, about all the choices and chances and acts of courage that had shaped her path. She had been left to die, but she had chosen to live. She had been abandoned, but she had been found. She had been lost, but she had discovered herself. And in the finding and the discovering, she had built a life more beautiful than any she could have imagined in those dark moments in the snow. The story of Florence and Vincent became family legend, told to children and grandchildren as a testament to the power of resilience and love. It was a story about survival and second chances, about the kindness of strangers and the strength of commitment. It was a story about a woman who refused to let the worst moment of her life define her, and a man who saw beyond the surface to the remarkable person underneath. Years later, when Florence was quite old, she would sit with her great-grandchildren and tell them about that day in the blizzard. She would describe the cold and the fear, but also the moment when Vincent appeared, when everything changed. She would tell them that sometimes life brings you to your knees, but if you keep getting back up, if you keep believing in the possibility of better days, those days will come. She would tell them that love, real love, is not about grand gestures and perfect moments, but about showing up every day, about choosing each other again and again, about building something lasting from the raw materials of trust and respect and genuine affection. Florence Me, who had once been Florence Wright, wife of a cruel man who left her to die, had become Florence Zimmerman, beloved wife and mother and grandmother and great-grandmother, successful businesswoman, pillar of the Reading community, and living proof that the worst chapters of your life do not have to be the final ones. She lived to be 82 years old, dying peacefully in her sleep in her own bed in the house she and Vincent had built together. Vincent, who had been by her side for over 40 years, held her hand as she took her last breath, whispering that he would find her again, somewhere beyond this life, and that he would always, always call her his own. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, spanning multiple generations. Her children spoke of her strength and wisdom, her grandchildren of her kindness and creativity, her great-grandchildren of the stories she told and the love she gave so freely. The town of Reading mourned the loss of one of its most respected citizens, and the Zimmerman Ranch felt her absence like a physical ache. But her legacy lived on in the family she had created, in the business she had built, in the countless lives she had touched over the decades. The dress shop still bore her name, now run by her great-granddaughter. The ranch still operated under the principles Wilhelm had established and Florence had helped maintain. The values she had instilled in her children had been passed down through the generations, creating a family tree filled with people who knew the importance of kindness, courage, and never giving up, no matter how difficult circumstances became. Vincent lived for 3 more years after Florence's death, staying active on the ranch and spending time with his children and grandchildren. But everyone could see that part of him had gone with Florence, that he was simply waiting for his time to join her. When he finally passed away at 84, his last words were, "I found her." And those who heard him swore he was smiling as if seeing something beautiful that only he could perceive. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their headstones simple but eloquent. Florence's Reed. Florence Me Zimmerman, 1860–1942, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She survived the storm and built a legacy of love. Vincent's Reed. Vincent Louis Zimmerman, 1856–1939, beloved husband, father, grandfather. He found her in the cold and loved her in the warmth. Their story became part of the fabric of Reading's history, passed down through generations as a reminder that love could emerge from tragedy, that kindness mattered, that second chances were real. Young couples would visit their graves and make wishes for marriages as strong and lasting as the Zimmermans had shared. The house they had built remained in the family, carefully maintained and treasured as a testament to what they had created together. The dress shop continued to thrive into the modern era, adapting to changing fashions while maintaining the commitment to quality and craftsmanship that Florence had insisted upon. The ranch, too, endured, evolving with the times but staying true to the core principles of fair dealing and hard work that Wilhelm had established and his descendants had honored. In the end, the story of Florence and Vincent was not just about surviving a blizzard or overcoming a cruel husband's abandonment. It was about the choices we make in our darkest moments, about the power of unexpected kindness, about the way love can heal wounds we thought were permanent. It was about a woman who refused to be defined by what was done to her, and instead defined herself by how she responded. It was about a man who saw beyond circumstance to potential, who offered help without conditions, who loved without reservation. It was a story about being left in the icy wind and being called home, about freezing and being warmed, about dying and choosing life, about being lost and being found, about the end of one story becoming the beginning of a better one. And it was a story about love, the kind of love that transforms and endures, that weathers all storms and emerges stronger. The kind of love that builds legacies and creates families and changes the trajectory of lives. The kind of love that makes the difference between merely surviving and truly living. Florence had been left in the icy wind by a man who never deserved her. But she was found by a cowboy who saw her worth, who called her his own, and who spent the rest of his life proving that she had been right to trust him with her heart. Together, they created something beautiful and lasting, a love story that began in tragedy but ended in triumph, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of genuine love. Their descendants carried their story forward, telling it to each new generation, making sure that Florence and Vincent's legacy of love and courage and second chances lived on long after they were gone. And in that way, they achieved a kind of immortality, not through fame or fortune, but through the lives they touched and the love they shared, rippling outward through time like waves on a pond, endless and eternal. The ranch stood as it always had, the land still beautiful, the mountains still majestic in the distance, the creek still flowing past the spot where Vincent had first told Florence he loved her. And if you listened carefully on quiet evenings, some said you could still hear echoes of their laughter, still feel the warmth of their love in the air, a reminder that some bonds transcend mortality and that true love stories never really end. They simply become part of the landscape, woven into the very fabric of a place, ensuring that every sunset over the Zimmerman ranch, every spring bloom in the meadows, every star in the night sky served as a monument to the love between a woman who survived and the man who helped her learn to truly live again.